Hey guys, back again. My name is Billy Roberts. I'm a concept artist and illustrator. In today's video, we'll be discussing topics around the development for creatives and things that helped me. During that, we'll be illustrating a Warhammer 40k Space Marine, and this is all based on some lore that I read and not based on other artists' interpretation of that lore. It's my interpretation. So with that being said, I'll dive into the first topic. The first section that I would like to talk about is to do with art style. Art style is a really sort of nuanced and tricky thing to discuss because it's very personal, and it can be a personal development process of time, energy, and in my personal experience, a lot of time. But there are some things that I have discovered that can help you push your art into the direction that you would actually like it to go in. Now, before we get into that, it's important to place some mental boundaries in place before we actually go into the how-to portion of this topic, and that is things like patience and dedication and time. It's very important to remind ourselves that without the correct amount of time or dedication, achieving results is going to be vastly more difficult. So it's important for us to always balance expectation with those parameters and be honest with ourselves. And expectation will allow us to have the satisfaction of what we're doing based on the input that we are currently putting in. And for patience, just being mindful of how we're treating ourselves or yourself when struck with challenges or difficulties in your creative journey. If we can get ourselves into a place of patience, we can treat ourselves a little bit more gently. We will get into a few other points, but those are the three main things that I would like to mention as we dive into the actual how-to portion of developing an art style. So the how-to portion, it's a tricky one to pinpoint, but it's a combination, in my opinion, of many factors, and those factors can be labeled as such, which would be studying would be my primary. You have observation, and third would be fundamentals. So they kind of go hand in hand, some of them, especially like studying. You could say studying and fundamentals kind of go hand in hand. But I'll dive into like what I mean by studying. So if you look at someone's work and you go, wow, their art style is incredible, that's typically where a lot of people desire to find their own style, their own voice. The portion of studying is to, if you do want to have your work look a certain way, you actually need to dive down this very deep rabbit hole of figuring out what you want it to look like, and you need to be very specific. And then if you can find an artist that is a representation of that, you will study their work. And typically what I found works the most is a study in such a way where you're deciphering and unweaving their creative process, their brushwork, their everything. And it can take up to, in my experience, it can take up to a few months to really get to a point where I know how they did that, and I know how I would like to replicate that. So that's how I would treat studying in general. It's not so much like a master's study, it's just studying the work accordingly. You then have the other side of it, which I mentioned, which was observation. And the reason why I mention observation is because it is such a, I would say, a grounded, like, it's the beginning of the foundation when being an artist is you're basically oversimplifying or simplifying the reality in which you see it. And every artist does that in their own ways. And some artists, they actually develop their art style through just pure observation. Yes, they have eyes, and yes, they have access to the internet, so they are able to do studies as well. But I would say the most interesting artists that I've seen are the ones that pull from the most accurate referencing, and in this case it would be real life, and they're observing these nuances and they are replicating it in their work, but through the use of simplification. That would be the core reason why I mention observation as one of those things that's very important in the development of finding your look. It's something that should not be overlooked as a tool. So that's that's a tricky one. It takes a few years to really get into the truth of that, and it's a skill that will need to be practiced over many years. Then to top it off, we have the third point, which is fundamentals. And that's a really, I guess, bad topic to bring up, because I don't know how many people I've heard that talk about fundamentals, because it's such a broad thing. And me just saying, hey, get good at fundamentals, it's not very helpful. There is a caveat to that, though, and that is through studying and through observation, it does become easier to learn certain portions of fundamentals. And I would just say the big part about fundamentals, in my opinion, without sounding like every other person right now, is that it really just comes down to planning. So set aside, like, if you've got 12 months of the year, let's say 2025, you want to become good artist in some way, you should be breaking down the challenge of learning all of the fundamentals into digestible chunks and making sure that you're not overwhelming yourself with too many tasks at once. So there's enough content out there to find the fundamentals and what they are and starting to learn them. Maybe one day I'll make a video on the topic with some demos, but for now I'll leave it at that, because it's one of those things that if you're really doing the first things that we spoke about, which was time and dedication, if you are dedicated and you are putting the time in, then figuring out the fundamentals for yourself is a very easy process. And I would say that that's kind of the big portion of this video, is to be a realist for artists and be a realistic voice in this regard. And that is to say that this stuff is not easy. None of it is easy. And also all of us are so different in our chemistry, with how we think and how we learn, and things that are best for us and things that aren't best for us. We are all very, very different. So something that worked for me, it may not work for you. And hence the mindset allocation to the importance of learning that stuff and having a healthy mindset around it. That is actually more powerful for longevity as an artist, to consistently be passionate and inspired and patient with yourself and dedicated enough, but also holding balance in your life to not go crazy with it and doing like 16 to 18 hour days trying to learn it super fast. So that's really the big portion of my advice here, is construct a pattern of healthy mindset. And if you're not, let's say, dedicated enough to it, you will struggle. And that's just the truth, because even people that dedicate their entire lives to this, learning how to be an artist and learning how to design and illustrate, it's a huge endeavor, and it's not something that comes within a year, and it can, but it's something that if you're looking to be a broad artist that can tackle any subject matter thrown your way, it does need to be viewed in the decades and not in the years. And that's coming from my opinion, that's coming from my experience, that's coming from someone that has done it and stayed dedicated for at times very large portions, and then at times not so much. And when I was super dedicated, I had maybe every 3 to 6 months I was getting a sensation of I've leveled up, I've learned something. And as you go through that journey, you start to realize the things that you can get better at and you start to realize the importance of these other facets behind your thinking. Because if it was all due to time and just time, then it would just be a matter of who can sit down on the chair the longest. But it's not that simple. It's, like I said at the beginning of the video, it's actually a multi-faceted thing. It's more than I've even described today. I would probably be able to list off 30 things that work in combination with each other for the execution to happen, and for those moments of leveling up to happen. So a little bit about the video. So those are my thoughts on that topic, but I might just talk about a little bit of what I'm actually doing on the screen, and I'll explain why I decided to do this. And to describe it, we have to go back to when I was 12, and my brother at the time, I think he got some Warhammer for his birthday. And I remember reading those books afterwards when it was a boring rainy day, and I was just so absorbed by the artwork in these books. I was so absorbed by the narrative and the lore, and I actually started drawing with, at the time it was graphite, and I started drawing a Space Marine with graphite onto like an A1 sheet of paper. And I did like little smaller drawings as well. And I remember even when I was 12, I looked at the work and I did a sort of a comparison where I looked at mine and then I looked at the book, and I was like, mine's not as good as theirs. And that's just an observation, right? It's not like me trying to compare, it's just a human observation. So more recently, I actually dove back into the books and dove back into the lore, and it was such a nostalgic and rewarding thing to do for me, and that kind of inspired me today to make this video for you guys, because it was such an interesting feeling going like, I haven't looked at this content properly for years, like over a decade, and I knew about it and I'd maybe read small portions, but I hadn't actually dove really deep into it. So I dove deep and I got super inspired, and I think what I wanted to do was draw the Space Marine that I tried to draw when I was 12. And it's extremely rewarding experience. And we're talking about a 15 plus year age space between the two drawings. But I think I did a really good job this time round of going about it the right way. And what I mean by that is I didn't look at any concept art or illustrations floating around on the internet to actually draw the Space Marine. What I did is I read the lore. I dove into the lore of Space Marines and their lives, their grim, dark existence in this intense universe, and I decided to basically give myself a brief based on the stuff that I was reading and come up with a character. And that type of process is very much so inspiration first and mindful thoughts around the thing that I'm about to illustrate or design. And it's a much healthier way, in my opinion, and a stronger way to approach stuff like this, because the inspiration that you actually gather and the imagery that you build in your mind in a fantasy version, a non-solidified thought, is hugely powerful. And it really pushed me very easily from beginning to end on this drawing, on this illustration. And I wanted to share that story because I think it gives me a great opportunity to talk about one of the other major things. Because we can talk about fundamentals, or we could talk about specifically anything else. But like I said, we need to be looking at our mindset as well, if not equally or more than important, to look after. Because when I was 12, I did the silly thing by looking at the Warhammer book next to my drawing, and I got discouraged. And as a 12-year-old, you don't have all the lessons under your belt. You don't have the ability to say, well, I'll get there one day, and feel like that. Sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't. Really depends. It didn't discourage me from drawing. It just discouraged me away from the complexity of the 40k universe. It was a little bit too hard for me, and I went back to my Dragon Ball Z or anime stuff. So that's actually, one of the big lessons that I wanted to share with everyone was, if you are going to go down this creative journey to find your voice, your style, your look, don't compare. Don't actively compare as a measuring device, more specifically. Competitive comparison is what I would call the healthy version of this. But just a raw comparison, if you are getting discouraged, or you're feeling like you're not able to consistently attack the problem, and you're diverting and trying different things all the time, you will never dive deep enough to get a level up. And that is, in my opinion, a very powerful thing to know. And it's a very helpful thing to be mindful of. And I like to look at certain references, visual references, and we'll paint a picture verbally as an example. But it would be like I'm not sure if anyone's actually seen this imagery, but it follows on from a metaphor. And it's basically, you have two miners digging into the side of a cliff to find gold. And one miner digs in really fast, and he gets exhausted, and he stops digging right before he finds the gold. And then the other miner, he takes his time, and he stays very, very focused, and he takes breaks, and he looks after himself, and he is able to dig further than the first miner. And the gold was actually at the same level, so he dug slightly further and he found it. That's a great way to view what I had just said, is that if you can't consistently dig at a problem, you'll find it very challenging to solve that problem. And when things are feeling difficult, or you're like, oh man, I've been at this for weeks now, like why can't I figure this out? And you start to question yourself, you are so close have to dig deeper and hold yourself true to what you're doing. And you have to keep pushing. Sometimes if you're this comes with a disclaimer, obviously. If you're burnt out or exhausted, maybe take a break, just like the miner. But when you go back, treat it, don't start a new hole, basically, right? Don't dig into a different part of the cliff. You should keep digging. And I feel like that's one of those things that really does help younger artists, or not necessarily younger, like I've said before, but just sort of beginner or even intermediate. Sometimes even experienced artists, when you mention this to them, which I have, they're like, oh yeah, you're so right, but they hadn't actually thought about it in that way. They just subconsciously had the dedication to keep grinding, and they did have those moments where they felt like they've leveled up in a major way. So I wanted to share that with you guys because it's a personal experience that I've had. It's a mistake that I've had, and it's something that I've had to learn over many years, and especially when tackling fundamentals. So yeah, I think that's an awesome thing to be conscious of, and hopefully some of the people that watch this video, you can resonate with that and maybe have a takeaway from it. And if so, then I'm very happy. So to go back into the topic around developing your art style is, you should probably have a relatively clear schedule to combat what you're trying to achieve. And what I mean by that is you don't want to divert too heavily in terms of one day you do environment art, and then the next day you do mech, and then the next day you do fantasy, female bowman. It's something that, this is actually something that I've done a lot because my mind was wandering and I wanted to do different things on every day. And when I did that, I actually didn't benefit probably as much as I could have if I stuck to one thing. So the reason why I bring that up is I would say you want to identify the direction in which you're traveling or want to travel, but then also specify the subject matters that you're going to do through that process of studying and fundamentals. Use a specific subject as the study device. And I would say that that's going to help immensely in this process as well. And it's worth noting that through that process, you will actually learn the things that you are passionate about. And something that I've always been passionate about, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, it's always been a combination between character art and environment art. It's always been sort of based around that sci-fi fantasy blend, so I guess you could call that as a subject. But I actually decided and knew wholeheartedly what I was doing was going to be extremely difficult. And I knew that because I had mentors at the time telling me that that's probably not a good idea And I would say it's only not a good idea to broaden your subjects if you're trying to get into the industry or you're trying to get a job or something within like a 2-year time frame. Their advice was 100% sound. It was 100% right, and I agree with them. I was sort of lucky enough to be able to sort of skate by and be able to learn both subjects fairly well. And I knew that I'm trying to lift 2 weights at the same time, so my progress was obviously going to be half if it were just one. But through that, I actually realized how much of a benefit it was, and it's a very specific benefit for me. And that's when I decided to dive down the art direction path for video games. When I'm working with character artists or I'm working with environment artists, I was able to speak their language. I was able to communicate design and fundamental changes with the work a lot easier. I was also able to brief things out easier because I had a broadened knowledge. I then also have spent 15,000 hours in Blender and texturing as well. So when it came to art direction, obviously that was a needed skill set to have to be able to communicate clearly with a modeling department. So that's why I say, maybe luck or maybe unmistakably, but it definitely paid back in my favor being more broad and being more general. I would say for maybe exclusive of certain studios in AAA, if you actually do some research behind art directors, you'll find their knowledge base is extremely broad, and same with creative directors. So it really depends how you view it, and it depends what your goals are. And I wouldn't say that, just do everything because you want to be an art director. There's so much management and paperwork that goes behind that role. I would say you've really got to work in a team and watch what that art director's doing to actually know if that's something you actually want. Because you definitely don't sit down and draw all day. I'll tell you that from first-hand experience. So I just wanted to add that in, that it is okay to be generalized. It can work and it can pay back. You just have to realize, actually, is a better word. You have to realize what the trade-off is. So I would say more specialized artists are definitely more hireable for specific companies, and you get the guarantee of drawing all day, every day, briefs being handed to you, and you just do your thing. Which I think is, for an artist, I think that's a lot more, it sounds a lot nicer of an experience. And I would say that's actually kind of where you'd like to or want to start out, because the amount of learnings that happen while you're doing that, the amount of education that you'll receive from colleagues and your superiors is just incredible. It comes with a layer of pressure as well, obviously, and sometimes pressure is good. Sometimes pressure helps you accelerate. So with that being said, I wanted to talk about the next part, and this all sort of plays into itself, right? Where we talked about being sort of focusing on smaller portions at a time. We then talked about being specialized versus non-specialized. Once you figure that out, just, roughly, you don't have to figure it out straight away. You can figure it out over a 2 to 3 year period and take the pressure off yourself a little bit, which might be quite beneficial. So the next part that plays into all of this, and that is projects. So having a dedicated project that you're referring to as an application from your studies or from your education, going back to a consistency in the project is just super powerful in my opinion. And it does play into the other thing where we talked about your subject matters not being too broad with that. I would say that the project keeps you on the right path, digging the same hole day in, day out, because it's the same language and it's the same design principles. And you're not trying to, it would be great if you were doing design principle studying or design sensibility and design fundamentals. When you do that, though, you would maybe deviate into new subjects within that project. So after working on projects myself, and these are, paid projects, the amount of learning that happens during a project development, it is vastly more superior in willy-nilly diving into these categories. So just keep that in mind when we're discussing all of this stuff, that it does come back to the scheduling. I would say come up with a project, set your schedule in place, dedicate the time that you're going to put into the project, and then build a plan of fundamentals and studying those fundamentals around all of it, where you do the fundamentals and then you do the application test to see if you've learnt that skill, and you're doing that directed at the project. So I think that is another massive thing that can help you guys immensely in all of this stuff. So that is my thoughts. If someone were to ask me, hey, how do I draw like you? That would be my answer. Yes, it's very generalized, and yes, it's very broad, but there is going to be many different people viewing this content, this video, and they're going to be from all different levels. So I just thought the best way to answer that question is to be quite generalized and focus on mindset, health, and all of the attributes that play into the development of a creative person. So we're starting to wrap up this Space Marine illustration. I had a lot of fun with this. Really enjoyed the proportions that I chose, the coloring. I just thought it came out really nice. It's not hyper polished, but it is high enough quality to the point where you can pick up visually what I'm trying to put down. And for that, I'm very happy. The other thing for the next video is I'll probably share some of my brushes that were used in this illustration. I'm not much of a brush specific person, but I think that people might find that interesting, and it's just a fun little thing to share with you guys. I made those brushes specifically for illustration work to hopefully land on a more painterly art style. And the idea behind it is to not have it look very super crisp and super tight, but to allow for a little bit of lost and found edges. And I think brushes can sort of either hinder or aid you in edge control quite drastically. So we're coming to the final parts here in the video. I've got about 5 to 6 minutes. So this last part I would dedicate to the Warhammer 40k universe, and we'll just talk a little bit about the actual Space Marines, because there might be a few people that are watching this that have absolutely no idea what it is I'm actually drawing. So the 40k universe, to put it into hyper sort of layman's, is that it's a sci-fi fantasy set in a sort of a war-torn universe. It's very grim and quite dark in its narrative, and that's the part that really gets me excited, is the almost realistic dystopian descriptions of their world. So Space Marines are candidates from this world, or from this universe, I should say. Basically, humans have colonized hundreds of planets, and only the most special of genetics will actually make the cut to attend the training to become a Space Marine, to fight for the Emperor. And through that training, it's extremely, extremely grim and very, very dark. Most of them actually don't make it through the training. A lot of them die, and they go through genetic modification. They go through surgeries to have certain organs that help them survive in extreme circumstances implanted in them, and that sort of spans over from memory, I think it's about a 10-year period, or might be even less, it might be 6 years. And some of the recruits actually pass away from the training and from the surgical implants that they put into the recruits as these organs. The recruits normally come on at the age of 12 or 13, and typically the process of training sort of ends around 17 or 18. And then once the lucky few that make it through all of that, they get equipped with the power armor, and they become initiates to these I would call like factions of Space Marines. And there's basically segregated factions of Space Marines that have different principles, and that's in place basically to allow individuals to be fitted into a faction that suits them as individuals. So that's a very, very light touch on the lore side of this Space Marine, but it's very deep, and if anyone is interested in reading some really epic, grim, dark, sci-fi, fantasy content, definitely I could not recommend it enough. It's super cool and very deep. So here's the final result of what I ended up coming up with. All in all, I think I might do, if people enjoyed this, I might actually do a few more. I was thinking of doing the Chaos, either a Chaos Space Marine or a maybe some smaller things from the world. It would be kind of a fun little series to do some fan art of 40k. I definitely enjoyed doing this one. So leave a comment below if you guys are interested in that. And if we do that, I'll share my brushes that I use for illustrations like this in the next video. So also let me know if that's something that you guys are interested in as well. And here's the final PNG. So a pretty nice result, not hyper polished as I said, but more than enough for what we needed it to be. So thank you so much for watching, guys. Make sure to like the video, make sure to leave your comment and subscribe. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.